Energy and moisture is resurging in the US ahead of a renewed severe weather risk for tomorrow. We have an enhanced level 3 out of 4 risk across portions of the deep south, and you can see all the deeper plumes of energy moving up into this region. Numerous strong to severe storms are expected with large hail, gusty winds, but also a particularly elevated tornado risk. The tornado threat is pretty high across this region, so in this video we'll break down all the specifics as to how you can stay safe out there. We also have a very interesting May pattern continuing where we have some plumes of colder air, especially for May standards moving into the US. We'll take a look into how long this will continue and when this will change. Today is Wednesday, May 6th, and today in the weather world we have a lot of details from severe weather to some pretty big time pattern changes coming. We'll dive into all of that in today's video. The biggest and the most immediate story though is definitely that severe weather risk, especially this enhanced 3 out of 5 risk across portions of central Mississippi into Alabama. This does include Birmingham. It's a very localized corridor as of this recording. It might grow a little bit bigger by the time we get to Wednesday, but also if you're in this broader yellow or even green shade, isolated to scattered severe storms are possible. So be on the lookout, especially later this afternoon. That's when the main storm timing is expected. There's definitely a wind threat, there's definitely a large hail threat, but tornado is actually one of the biggest threats from the system, and it's what's driving this enhanced risk in this yellow shade. This is where there's a 10% chance of a tornado occurring of any location in this region. So the probability is not too shabby. It's definitely something that's worth watching and staying weather aware for and making sure we have a weather safety plan. This does include Tuscaloosa, Birmingham. By the way, Alabama, we had no tornadoes in the whole month of April, so this is really one of the higher severe weather risk days in this region that we've had this year so far. Most of the severe weather has focused further north, but even back into Louisiana, we are watching out for tornado risk. These hatched lines here, those indicate potential for strong tornadoes, a few EF1, EF2, or potentially greater. One thing really driving our risk is we're going to have a lot of upper level energy and winds out ahead of a pretty strong upper level trough. So notice if we zoom out, we get all these winds coming in from the southwest through the day on Wednesday. This is going to start to prime the atmosphere, but when we get some little disturbances embedded with this flow, this is really going to enhance some of the wind energy. Look at this jet streak of very gusty winds developing across portions of the region and just to the north across Tennessee, but especially across Birmingham and Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana. Some of these very strong winds ripping out of the southwest up high in the atmosphere. Well, when we combine that with winds coming out of the southeast at the surface, this creates rotation and wind shear, and this rotation does allow for some tornado formation. The significant tornado parameter values are also elevated, so I've overlaid the severe weather risk in this yellow shading, and notice we're going to have a cold front moving through. Out ahead of that cold front, some of these values bubbling up. We have some yellow, even orange shade colors. That's some decently high significant tornado parameters, which means there's not only an elevated tornado threat, but the few tornadoes that do form could be on the stronger side. So this is a fairly concerning signal I'm watching here across this region, and we're just emphasizing some of the ingredients in place. All this is to say is that the tornado risk is elevated more so than might be usual with this type of setup. So just making sure we're staying weather aware for that. So let's track this all out on radar. It's all going to be thanks to a cold front that's moving to the south. That's what's going to be sparking all these storms as it encounters and clashes with a very moist and unstable air mass ahead of it. Waking up on Wednesday morning, by the time we're watching this video, we are waking up to a lot of storms just to the north. So Arkansas, Tennessee, a pretty wet start, a wet morning commute. Also could see some storms in central Texas, but later on through the day as the cold front continues south, you can kind of see its southward progression. More storms and showers will develop over the same areas. Eventually, as they encounter some of that greater instability and some of that wind shear that I showed you, that's when these storms will start becoming strong to severe. So a pretty rowdy setup across this region on Wednesday afternoon. This is now 6 o'clock. If you're anywhere in the circled area, your evening commute could be pretty messy, so I would definitely plan ahead for that. Maybe try to leave work a little early if you can. Now, something that stands out to me, we're watching some of these individual segments of storms. It might not just be one big line. We might have these individual cells, and this is where the tornado risk I think is especially highest. If any of these individual cells form before we get any sort of big line, that's where spin and rotation can really be maximized. Eventually, these storms will congeal into more of a traditional line, so more widespread damaging winds by this point. This is now 10 o'clock, so getting later on into the evening. We're now progressing further south down to the Gulf Coast, and eventually this line continues through South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and eventually it'll be headed for Florida as our cold front moves south. So by this point, it's all damaging winds, maybe an isolated spin-up tornado, but definitely the tornado risk is much lower as we get past midnight into Thursday. And then as we get later onto Thursday morning, everything will generally weaken and move off the coast. Some rain from Tallahassee to Jacksonville can be expected later on Thursday. So just reiterating, the initial threat will be highest for tornadoes on Wednesday afternoon. So if you're in this region, make sure you have a tornado safety plan before everything converges, transitions into more of that gusty wind threat as we get into Atlanta, and eventually advances further to the south and east. On Thursday, we have a 1 out of 5 marginal risk. We could get an upgrade to a slight risk somewhere across this region if that line is looking a little more robust, so something we'll watch. But stay weather aware across this region, especially for your Thursday morning commute as that decaying line of storms moves further south. This is really wind-driven, gusty winds. The tornado risk will be much lower and the hail risk will be lower as well. Hey, if you remember from the radar, something we're also tracking with the system is repeated rounds of rains. We are pretty concerned about flooding. We have a 2 out of 4 slight risk of flooding, really across some of the same areas that are seeing that severe weather risk, but extending a little bit further north. So don't only watch out for strong thunderstorms, but also some excessive rainfall. You can see the model highlights a few streaks of some heavier rain. Some of these orange colors, that's 3 to 4 inches plus of rainfall. So Chattanooga down to Memphis could be one potential corridor. Another one could include Birmingham over in Atlanta. This is very good news because we are in pretty deep drought in this region, but even if you're in drought, too much rain at once can cause some flooding. So good news coupled with some bad news. Just make sure to always turn around, don't drown, stay away from low water crossings, and just watch out for some river rises across this region as the heavier rain develops. Alright, so that's our immediate storm system. Let's take a look at the longer term pattern to track what's going to continue to happen further into May. I mentioned in my last video that we're in a bit of a weird May weather pattern where we have some troughing, pretty big troughing in fact, over portions of the eastern US that's driving some cooler air moving in. Actually, it's a piece of the polar vortex that's been moving over Canada and locking us into this pattern. Now, over the next week, we're going to have one more trough resurface across the eastern US. So as we go into the weekend, into early next week, next Monday and Tuesday, you can see this trough taking shape pretty clearly here over the Great Lakes. What this is going to do is it's going to send one more blast of cooler air across this region. After the current cold blast, which I'll show you in a minute, we're going to have another one expected later this weekend. After that though, it does look like we'll have a more definitive pattern change where stronger ridging will take over and the troughing will retreat back further to the north. So this is a bit more of a typical May weather pattern, and I would expect it to bring warmer weather but also some more stormy weather and a little bit further to the north. Last week and this week, it's a little bit quieter on the severe weather. The severe weather concerns are a little bit further to the south. Well, I do think the plains will be back in the conversation as we go toward the middle of May, especially if we do get any sort of troughing developing in the west. So just a heads up, a few more colder blasts over the next few days, but longer term we are going to transition into a more typical warm and humid May weather pattern. You can see what I mean for temperatures. We have this cold blast across much of the eastern country later this weekend. Behind those severe storms, some cooler air will come in. Nothing cold, it is May, but cool for May means 60s, 70s highs and 40s, 50s lows. So relatively pleasant, a bit of a warm up ahead of our second cold blast. But here it is, that second blast coming in early next week with that second trough on Monday. So watch out for some more cooler conditions. Again, more 60s, 70s highs, 40s, 50s lows, and a nice drop in humidity. The exception, out in the west, it'll be very warm. In fact, we could be pushing triple digits in the desert southwest again. So kind of the opposite where a heat wave is coming to there. And then notice as we get later into May, this heat wave will slowly spread further to the east. So this is the warmer weather pattern that eventually will advect in. Might take a while to do so, but when it does, that's when severe weather will really become heightened again. So in terms of what this means for rainfall, once we get past that system that's moving across portions of the south, we'll be a little bit quieter on Friday. We could have some activity redeveloping across the Gulf Coast. Friday looks like a pretty quiet severe weather day though as of now. My next focus though is that second cold blast. It's going to come along a cold front. You can kind of see a loose line of storms here from the Ohio Valley down into Texas. This cold front, as it encounters into more warm Gulf air resurging, it could bring back some severe weather concerns on Sunday and Monday. So it's pretty far out for specifics. We have pretty low confidence, but notice some of these brighter colors here over the plains into the Midwest. That could be some locally strong to severe storms possible, so something we're watching over the next few days. And then as this advances to the southeast, as that colder air moves in, a few strong to severe storms are also possible, with otherwise just a generally wet pattern across the eastern US. So again, we're really emphasizing that there are a lot of details uncertain. Our two best computer models are handling the situation quite a bit differently. We'll for sure have a lot more updates in the coming days, so stay tuned to the channel. Subscribe also if you don't want to miss that. But that will be the next weather maker I'm tracking sometime Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. We could be dealing with another just general mess of rain and then maybe some severe storms embedded within that. Hey, I did want to draw the model out a little further. So we are getting into La La Land. This is kind of more just looking for fun at what might be coming down the pipeline because models become pretty unreliable after a week. And notice we do see an uptick in stormy weather across the central and eastern US with that different pattern change. Don't focus on specifics, but the trend is there for some more warmth, and whenever we get that combination in May, it does often lead to severe weather. So that's why I think the weather will be turning more busy as we get further into the middle of May. But just something that caught my eye that I want to look at. Look at this, Tuesday, May 19th, the GFS spins up, that looks like a hurricane to me, down near Florida and crosses into Florida as we get into 2 to 3 weeks from now, Wednesday, May 20th. This is not going to happen, I just want to say that out there. Any sort of tropical system this far out, if you see anything like this on social media, it's all hype. There is no science behind this, in as much that it's just one random computer model somehow spinning up a tropical system when there's no reason to believe this will happen. But the fact that there is a tropical system being depicted, this is actually the first that I've seen of the season, so I think it's just a reminder that we're getting close to hurricane season. Some of the energy in the Gulf, some of the energy over the Atlantic Ocean is starting to build, and I will say that as we get deeper into May, but especially June, that's the start of hurricane season. That's where hurricanes and tropical systems might start more seriously entering the conversation. So I just wanted to show this as some more of what's a preview of eventually what's going to come as we get some more tropical energy, and the seas are going to start lighting up soon, and it is getting into that time of year. Crazy to believe it, but we are almost in the summer. Eventually the conversation will shift from severe storms to hurricanes. Hey, closing out here on our 2-week outlook, notice that this big warmth that's overspreading and moving further to the east, so the colder air that we've been tracking will be retreating back to the north as that ridge of high pressure kind of flattens out. So this is a pattern change I was talking about. Not only will it be warmer, it'll be wetter, especially across the southern US, but really much of the US predicted wetter than normal weather. Considering May is already a wet month across much of the US, this means even wetter conditions than that. Good news for drought, but of course bad news for potential severe weather. So we'll track in the next few days, but all that to say is a lot more storms I think will be coming soon once we get past this week. So thanks so much for watching. The biggest weather concern, immediate weather concern at least, will be definitely that severe weather risk, that tornado risk, which is particularly elevated across Mississippi and Alabama. So make sure you're staying safe, staying weather aware in those regions. Otherwise, a bit of a quieter stretch ahead with some of that colder air moving in. We'll watch out for that severe weather risk with that second cold front Sunday and Monday. And then of course all eyes will be toward the middle of May into what could be a transition to an even stormier period. Thanks so much for watching. If you never want to miss any of the weather updates as some of these developments happen as we get closer into tropical season, consider subscribing. But otherwise, hope you all stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.